Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Before we dive into what might be one of the most shocking political corruption stories you'll hear this year, I want to ask you a quick favor. If this is your first time here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. And if you've been watching for a while, share this video with someone who needs to see it. Trust me, what we're about to uncover is absolutely mind-blowing, and these are the stories that need to get out there. Now, picture this: 4:22 in the morning, Minneapolis, Minnesota. The city is buried in winter ice. The streets are completely empty. Parked cars are frozen in place under thick layers of frost. Everything looks peaceful, almost serene, but that silence is about to be shattered in a way this community will never forget. To the 42,000 residents of the Cedar Riverside community, the building at the end of their block represented something important. It was a place of leadership, a symbol of progress. It was the district office of Senator Ahmed Nouri, a man they trusted, a man they believed in, a man who claimed to represent their interests. But outside, in that bitter, cold darkness, something is happening. A long line of unmarked black federal vehicles rolls silently to a stop. 58 agents from the FBI and DEA step slowly out into the freezing air. There are no sirens, no flashing warning lights, just cold, calculated intent. These agents aren't here for a welfare check. They're here for something far more serious. Agents form a tactical stack at the main entrance. Badges are covered, weapons are ready. Then a breaching hammer slams against the heavy oak door once, twice. On the third devastating hit, the frame splinters and gives way. Federal agents burst through shouting commands, sweeping every room with military precision. What they're about to find inside will expose one of the most elaborate criminal networks ever operated from within a U.S. Senator's office. Stick with me through this entire story because what unfolds is absolutely incredible, and the implications reach far beyond just one city or one politician. As flashlights cut through the darkness of Senator Nour's office, agents expect to find the usual things you'd see in any political office: constituent mail, policy folders, maybe some financial records. But what they uncover instead stops them cold. This isn't a political office. This is the infrastructure of a drug cartel. Behind a false ventilation panel near the main desk, agents pull out 23 sealed bricks of high grade cocaine. Each one is stamped with a distinctive cartel insignia. This isn't some user's personal stash we're talking about. This is a distributor's inventory, the kind of quantity that supplies entire neighborhoods, maybe entire cities. But that's just the beginning. In a tightly locked steel safe bolted directly to the floor, drilling teams work for over an hour to force the door open. When they finally succeed and look inside, they find $4.7 million in cash. Let that number sink in for a moment. $4.7 million stacked neatly, banded by size and serial number. It's more cash than the entire neighborhood's bank branch holds in its vault on any given day. Think about what that means. This isn't money from a few shady deals. This represents systematic, organized criminal activity happening over months or even years, and it's happening in the office of someone the community elected to protect them. But perhaps the most alarming discovery sits right there on Ahmed Nour's mahogany desk: a satellite phone, still active, blinking with an unread notification. Agents carefully examine the screen and discover encrypted instructions linking Minneapolis to major financial hubs in Nairobi, Mogadishu, and Dubai. This isn't just drug trafficking. This is a full-scale international money laundering pipeline operating out of a United States Senator's office. This wasn't some mistake or misunderstanding. This was a deliberate system, carefully built and maintained by the very man his community trusted most. If you believe that politicians caught trafficking drugs should face exactly the same justice as street dealers, no special treatment, no political immunity, hit that like button right now and drop a comment saying equal justice. Let me know what you think about this absolute betrayal of public trust. Stay with me because as the investigation deepens, the scope of this betrayal becomes even more shocking. Let's talk about who Senator Ahmed Nouri really was because understanding his background makes this betrayal even more profound. Ahmed Nouri, now 58 years old, had long been viewed as a bridge between cultures in Minneapolis. At public events, he spoke eloquently about education reform and community safety. Parents brought their children to meet him. Local businesses proudly displayed photos of him cutting ribbons at their grand openings. In truth, beneath that carefully maintained public image, he was using his political office to build a criminal network that would eventually span multiple countries and involve hundreds of millions of dollars. This transformation didn't happen overnight. Through 27 shell companies established over more than 6 years, that network grew from simple political ambition into full scale organized crime. The numbers are staggering. Investigators traced more than $79 million in cash and an additional $220 million in financial transfers that passed through various programs connected to his name. These weren't legitimate business transactions. These were carefully disguised criminal proceeds being laundered through what looked like community development initiatives. Surveillance footage recovered during the investigation shows something chilling. The video captures Ahmed Nouri meeting regularly with Yahya Osman, a 34-year-old man with direct links to the notorious Sinaloa cartel, one of the most violent and powerful drug trafficking organizations in the world. Noor had been protecting this man for years, providing political cover and using his influence to shield criminal operations from law enforcement scrutiny. Their meetings followed a pattern. Always in basement rooms or rented storage spaces, never the same location twice. Nur never stayed longer than 20 minutes. He wasn't there to give speeches or discuss policy. He was there to approve the movement of tons of narcotics into American communities. The senator maintained operational security that would impress intelligence agencies. He used 5 different cell phones, each with a separate number and purpose. Those phones connected him to corrupt officials and even judges. Some received direct payments. Others were manipulated into believing they were somehow helping national security efforts. One by one, they stopped asking uncomfortable questions. By the time the full scope of the operation began to emerge, Noor was already preparing contingency plans. Among the most shocking discoveries was documentation of a shipment containing 62 cargo loads, officially labeled as humanitarian supplies, but actually filled with narcotics. This wasn't street level crime. This was organized criminal activity carried out with resources and sophistication normally associated with military or intelligence operations, and it was all directed by a man the community had trusted to represent their interests. When federal investigators realized the full scale of what they were dealing with, they knew a standard investigation wouldn't be enough. The conspiracy had grown too large, too sophisticated, and involved too many locations operating simultaneously. What they needed was something unprecedented. Maps covered the walls of the FBI command center. Red marks indicated high-risk sites across Minneapolis and surrounding areas. Every line drawn between locations pointed toward a central hub, the basement behind a nondescript community building on the outskirts of the city. From the outside, it looked completely abandoned and isolated. In reality, it was an active operational hub where money, weapons, and drugs moved through every single night. A massive coordinated plan was assembled. They called it Operation Northern Sweep. For the first time in modern law enforcement history, the FBI, U.S. military support units, and more than 100 federal agents from multiple agencies prepared for a coordinated assault targeting 29 locations simultaneously, all before dawn, all without warning. At exactly 4:30 a.m., just 19 minutes before the raid on Senator Noor's office began, the operation launched. Black helicopters flew low over frozen fields, their rotors cutting through the silent morning air. Surveillance drones cast powerful beams of light across the ground below. Dozens of FBI armored vehicles roared toward the gates of what appeared to be an ordinary manufacturing complex. When they hit the first security barricade, the impact literally shook the ground. Sparks burst from twisted metal as the gates were forced aside. Agents moved forward in coordinated waves, each team knowing exactly where to go and what to look for. Explosive charges blew open reinforced side doors. Flash grenades turned pitch darkness into blinding white light, disorienting anyone inside. The tactical precision was overwhelming. Inside the complex, agents discovered it was designed like a maze, deliberately confusing with laboratories, storage rooms, and reinforced bunkers throughout. The air was thick with the acrid smell of chemicals used in drug processing. Teams advanced room by room, clearing each space methodically. Then gunfire suddenly echoed through the darkness. Armed guards had opened fire from behind stacked crates, trying desperately to defend the operation. The firefight was brief but incredibly intense. When it ended, several suspects lay face down on the cold concrete, hands zip-tied behind their backs. Then investigators found what they'd been looking for. Behind a steel door secured by three separate high-security locks, agents discovered a fully operational drug production line, stainless steel processing tanks, industrial conveyor belts, and racks filled with chemical containers. This wasn't some makeshift operation. This was a functioning pharmaceutical-grade manufacturing facility, protected by security systems that resembled military installations. Stick with me because what they found next proves this went way beyond just one corrupt politician. When the dust settled and the last suspect was taken into custody, the real investigative work shifted to the evidence recovery teams. What they uncovered in the following hours painted a picture of corruption that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. Agents opened large metal filing cabinets containing folders with innocent sounding labels: community development, youth outreach, educational programs. They sounded completely harmless, exactly the kind of programs you'd expect a senator's office to support. But when investigators examined the actual contents, the numbers told a very different story. Nearly every folder contained financial receipts for enormous sums of money. These weren't small community grants. We're talking about transfers for $83,000, $120,000, sometimes more, all approved rapidly with virtually no oversight, often in the middle of the night when no one would be watching. A dedicated team of financial forensic analysts spent days comparing bank statements against official city approvals and permits. Gradually, disturbing patterns began to emerge. A city councilman in one Minneapolis suburb had signed 6 separate building permits in just 12 minutes. That's physically impossible if you're actually reading and evaluating the applications. He was rubber stamping approvals without even looking at them. A police captain received a substantial security consulting fee deposited into his personal account. On the exact same day, surveillance footage showed a suspicious truck passing through his district without being stopped or inspected, despite being flagged by other officers. A medical clinic billed government healthcare programs $1.9 million for services that investigators later confirmed were never actually provided. The money simply disappeared into the network. One moment during the evidence review particularly stood out. An elderly clerk who had worked faithfully at City Hall for 27 years began crying when investigators showed her certain documents. "I gave them those permits because they told me it was for the children," she whispered, her voice breaking. She had genuinely believed she was helping her community, never realizing she was being manipulated as part of an elaborate criminal scheme. The truth was devastating. This wasn't old-fashioned bribery whispered about in dark alleys or conducted in secret meetings. This was corruption done with official forms, government stamps, and legitimate-looking documentation. It was bribery hiding in plain sight, disguised as normal bureaucratic processes. A second evidence room held something equally disturbing. Long tables were covered with maps printed from commercial satellite images. Colored pins marked warehouses, basement facilities, and river docks throughout the Minneapolis area. Every single location was connected by drawn lines, creating what looked like a transportation network. These weren't random criminal hiding places. This was a sophisticated distribution system, carefully planned and coordinated, designed to move product efficiently while avoiding detection. The level of organization was stunning. What investigators realized was chilling. This network wasn't built by outside criminals infiltrating the system. It was built and protected by insiders who were supposed to be safeguarding the community. Near those maps, investigators discovered handwritten notebooks that would prove crucial to understanding how deep the corruption ran. These weren't encrypted computer files or sophisticated digital records. These were old school handwritten ledgers, the kind of evidence that's incredibly difficult to dispute in court. One notebook contained a detailed list of monthly payments to a specific police officer, $41,200, paid every single month for almost 2 years straight. That's nearly $500,000 paid to one officer who was supposed to be enforcing the law, not helping criminals avoid it. Another ledger listed dozens of small businesses throughout the Minneapolis area. Next to each business name was a dollar amount. Some payments were relatively modest, just $600 or $800. Others were substantially higher, reaching $37,000 or more. No legitimate services were documented as being provided in exchange. The money simply moved from one account to another, with no paper trail explaining why. Investigators also recovered numerous emails from various accounts. The messages were brief and coded, but their meaning was clear to anyone familiar with criminal operations. One message read simply, "Approve the transfer, no delay." Another said, "Warehouse ready, do not inspect." These weren't complicated instructions or elaborate schemes. The corruption had become so normalized, so routine, that participants barely bothered hiding it anymore. They'd grown comfortable and careless, confident that their positions would protect them. As evidence continued to be sorted and cataloged over several days, a difficult realization spread through the investigative team. This network had not been built by a few bad actors working in isolation. It had been systematically constructed and maintained over years with the cooperation, whether active or passive, of dozens of public officials at multiple levels of government. Every suspicious document had been signed by someone. Every questionable shipment had been waved through by someone with authority. Every financial irregularity had been overlooked by someone whose job was specifically to catch such things. The scope of institutional failure was staggering. In the late afternoon following the raids, prosecutors held a special briefing. The lead prosecutor stood before a long conference table, her expression serious. "We are not looking at one criminal mastermind," she stated clearly. "We are looking at a corrupted structure, a system that has existed for years, operating inside public institutions that citizens depend on for their safety." When the sun finally rose the morning after the coordinated raids, Minneapolis looked largely the same from a distance. The skyline hadn't changed, traffic still moved through the streets. But when residents stepped outside their homes, they immediately sensed something was profoundly different. The city felt quieter than usual, almost holding its breath. The flashing emergency lights from the night before were gone, but yellow police tape remained stretched across doors and wrapped around fences at multiple locations throughout the city. Residents stood on their porches longer than normal, looking around, talking quietly with neighbors. Morning newspapers arrived early, and the headlines were impossible to miss. Major federal raid in Minneapolis, 29 locations hit simultaneously, 245 kilograms of drugs seized, $52 million in cash recovered. For many older residents who had lived in Minneapolis for decades, the numbers were genuinely difficult to comprehend. They had trusted the buildings where these raids took place. Many had donated money to programs supposedly run from those offices. Some had volunteered their time. Now the names appearing in newspaper articles and on television news were familiar faces, people they'd voted for, people they'd believed in, and that recognition made the betrayal incredibly painful. A retired elementary school teacher stood on her front steps, newspaper trembling slightly in her hands. "I used to attend community meetings in that building," she whispered to no one in particular. She wasn't expressing anger. What showed on her face was deep hurt and profound disappointment. She had genuinely believed in the people who worked there, had trusted them to serve the community's interests. Inside coffee shops throughout the neighborhood, conversations were subdued and somber. "I never thought something like this could happen here, not in our community," one man said quietly, staring into his coffee cup. Another responded, "We voted for him. He seemed like such a good man, like he really cared." At a local diner popular with longtime residents, a group of men in heavy winter coats sat around a long table, the newspaper spread out before them. One man tapped the front page with his finger and said what many were thinking. "If a judge and a senator can do this, who can we possibly trust anymore?" The question hung in the air unanswered because nobody had a good response. Trust, once given freely, had been shattered, and everyone knew rebuilding it would take years, maybe generations. But in that painful silence, something else quietly began. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in months checked on each other. Community meetings that had been poorly attended suddenly filled with concerned residents demanding answers and accountability. A week after the raids, the steps outside the federal courthouse were crowded with residents. Some held handmade signs with messages like, "We deserve the truth," and "Who was really protecting us?" But this wasn't an angry mob demanding immediate revenge. This was a disappointed, hurt community seeking understanding and accountability. Local banks were noticeably quieter than usual. One small branch in the northern part of Minneapolis actually closed for 3 full days after its director was arrested as part of the investigation. Customers who had trusted that institution for years now questioned everything. Parents throughout the community felt particularly anxious and foolish. They remembered seeing unmarked vans parked outside schools several months earlier. At the time, they'd been told it was related to supply deliveries or maintenance work. Now they understood the terrible truth. "I feel so foolish," one mother admitted. "I actually thought they were delivering school supplies." Trust had been the first casualty of this scandal, but awareness was growing. Doors that previously were only locked at night now remained secured during the day. It wasn't necessarily fear driving this change. It was a new, painful awareness that danger doesn't always announce itself or come from outside. Sometimes the greatest threats emerge from within institutions that communities depend on for protection and leadership. Nobody claimed the city was healed or that everything would quickly return to normal. Real healing takes time, patience, and sustained effort. But people were talking again, asking questions, demanding transparency in ways they hadn't before. The raids were over, but the legal, social, and political consequences were just beginning. The community now faced difficult questions about accountability, reform, and how to rebuild trust once it's been fundamentally broken. A local reporter asked a senior federal agent, "Is the danger completely gone now?" The agent paused, then answered with a slight, knowing smile. "No, danger never completely disappears, but neither does courage. Neither does a community's determination to protect itself." The investigation wasn't finished. More arrests were expected, more evidence would be revealed. The full scope of the conspiracy would take months or even years to completely understand. But Minneapolis was standing again, asking hard questions, demanding better from its leaders. So there you have it, one of the most shocking cases of political corruption and drug trafficking to emerge from a major American city in recent years. We covered how a trusted senator built a massive criminal empire right under everyone's noses, how federal agents conducted one of the largest coordinated raids in modern history, and how a community is now struggling to rebuild trust in institutions they once believed in without question. The legal proceedings are ongoing, and we'll be tracking every development, every court appearance, and every new revelation as this case moves forward. That's exactly why you need to hit that subscribe button right now if you haven't already. These stories don't end with one video. There are updates coming, more evidence being revealed, and more people potentially being charged. And please share this video. Share it with your family, your friends, anyone who cares about political corruption and accountability. These stories need to reach as many people as possible because this isn't just about Minneapolis. This kind of corruption can happen anywhere when citizens stop paying attention and stop demanding transparency from their leaders. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Should Senator Noor face the maximum possible sentence? Do you think this kind of corruption is happening in other cities that just haven't been exposed yet? What reforms do you think are needed to prevent this from happening again? I genuinely read your comments and I want to hear your perspective. Thanks so much for watching. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and remember that accountability starts with an informed, engaged citizenry. Until next time, take care.